Hey everybody, week 11, big summary, messiest issues video. In my ever-evolving quest to make these short and simple, I'm going to jump right into it. Even though it's week 11, I'm still on that effort. So here we go. We're talking about postmodernism and higher education this week. Excuse me. So we had chapter 10, and we had a supplemental reading, which was extremely long. I did not warn you all about that. I forgot to. I apologize, but I think it was pretty digestible, and I think it was maybe even a little bit interesting, hopefully. So anyway, right into it. So Osmond chapter 10, postmodernism and higher education, the big summary. First of all, here's the big summary. Postmodernism is a 20th century rejection of 19th century ideals, mostly, or particularly, I should say, Western industrialist ideas. So particularly the dominant culture in those ideals. Okay, so postmodernism you can think of it most simply as a rejection of 19th century Western industrialist ideas. And that word rejection is really important. We'll get to that, particularly in class, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Second, it breaks with the modern claims of universality and rejects objective certainty. So basically says that the scientific method, which continues to search for an objective truth, is not all that useful. Third, it's parasitic of the modern. Really, all that means is it's a similar thing to the first point. Okay, so it just basically means that it's a rejection of modern ideals, particularly those 19th century Western industrialist ideals. So as it relates to education, postmodernists have adopted a critical pedagogy as a challenge to the way schools support dominant culture. So basically what they say is that, and we've talked about this the last probably, I guess, 3 weeks, but that schools can or usually are supportive of and just regurgitate the dominant culture and actually are they continue the oppression and repression of marginalized populations. So that's what postmodernists believe education tends to act as. Educational systems, I should say, tend to act as. Next, educational curriculum should be inclusive and connected to history, politics, and social context, eventually lead to collective action. Collective action being a rejection of those ideals that we have already described. The inclusiveness of history, politics, and social context is sort of, in a way, it's an assertion that 19th century ways, particularly in the Western culture of educating, have purposefully, at least in the forefront, not delved into those things, but in fact they should. And that's the only positive way to educate folks is to assess and acknowledge the political and social and historical context in which they're operating. And finally, teachers should use education as a way of helping students understand social context so that they might change it. So certainly related to the last point, but basically this is positioning teachers in the role of change agents within this modern context of education. Okay, so real quick summary. If you have to take one thing away, just try to understand that postmodernism is a rejection of most prevailing 19th century Western ideals. Okay. So some of the messy issues. Is this a change or a realization that a change is coming? There's, I think, maybe you're right even on the first page of the chapter, but right up front in the chapter, this question is posed. We'll talk about this a little bit in class, but basically what I would say is it's too early to tell. And so sometimes that can be a little frustrating to not have a good answer to a good question, but that's kind of where we are. And so I think what we'll do on Thursday in class is we'll talk a little bit about where we all land on this issue, because I think it's an important one. I think that'll just be kind of fun, and it's a tricky one too. So the second point, incredulity towards meta-narratives. So that the idea of meta-narratives, and this, I think this phrase even particularly is used in the text, but the idea here is that postmodernists reject the idea that there is or can be a prevailing culture or a prevailing narrative around a thing or a people or an idea, right? So that Western culture should not even be a construct that is accepted. And they operate very firmly from that stance that those meta-narratives or ideals about or constructs about a certain group or certain people which are prevailing shouldn't exist. Okay, and that is really, really important. You probably read the word meta-narratives a dozen times or so in the chapter, so you can see how important that is, but it's a foundational issue. So we'll dig more into that too, but I just want to make sure that was really clear and the importance was clear. Next, social discourses as the aim of education. So basically, all this is getting to is kind of what we said what I said in the summary, which is that the aim of education is not to promote the acquisition of some objective truth or to perpetuate some overriding culture. Instead, it is to help people, individuals, understand history and their place in it, and society and their place in it. So once again, eventually they can help to better it. And then finally, this is kind of my favorite part, are postmodernists for or against things? Typically, what I think the prevailing reaction to postmodernist viewpoints is that they are simply against things. And that may be right. And that's, again, something we're going to talk about on Thursday, but I just think it's a really interesting point, and I just want you all to be thinking about it as we come into class. Okay? So those are some issues that may or may not have been a little tricky. We can obviously talk about what you all might have struggled with. But I want to very quickly go through the supplemental article, Lowland, Postmodernism in Higher Education. This seemed maybe a little bit redundant, but it is supplemental, so hopefully that makes sense to you. So I'm just going to do a quick summary, and then we'll talk about any issues that you all struggled with in this, but because it was a little bit redundant, I'm going to just only do the summary. So first, this was published in 1995. I always try to point out when articles are a bit dated so that you understand the context in which they're written, particularly because this had some references to modern day, and that modern day is 23 years ago. Okay. So secondly, again, postmodernism is a rejection of modernism and of higher education. Higher education in this context being a symptom or a tool of that modern industrial society, particularly Western society. Modernism says that truth exists, reason and science can be used to find truth, and language can be used to describe truth. Postmodernism rejects all of that. Although they place an emphasis on language, it rejects its use as a way to describe truth, and wholly rejects the idea that truth exists and that science is the tool to find truth. Next, modernism also equates change with progress. What that usually means, and particularly from the postmodernist realm, is greater control over the natural world, or from the postmodernist perspective, greater control over those who have been marginalized and oppressed. It's also associated with the trapping of individuals in the machine of work and incentives. Again, just furthering that point, and postmodernists reject that ideal. Finally, postmodernism asserts that the assumption of modernism are either wrong or have been bad for individuals in society. So again, just kind of reiterating that point that postmodernism at its absolute core is fully a rejection of modernism. That's really, what I want to leave you with, and that's where we want to jump off on Thursday is, if that's what it is, what does that really mean? And particularly, what does that mean for higher education? Okay, so that's what I'm going to leave you with. Be thinking about that as we're going into class. Hopefully this is helpful. I'm thinking I hit under the 10-minute mark. We'll see if I did. That's my first true success of the semester on these, and we all should celebrate. All right, so I'll see you on Thursday. As always, let me know if you have any questions, okay? Thanks.